Hello.
Morning.
Morning.
Hey, morning.
Morning. Jesse and Morgan and Brian and Amanda. Hello. All right. So, how's everyone doing? How's everyone's week been?
Very good. Down
Good.
in Central California.
Yeah, yeah. You told me, or you mentioned that in the other meetings that we did. So, that's good. Uh, so,
Good Starbucks Wi-Fi.
oh, yeah. That's the attraction right there. Good. So, yeah, we had some good meetings this week that are sort of our specialty meetings, and then now it's our general meeting. So, lots of interesting conversations, side conversations, and I know Jesse is interested in, or he has some things to present today. I don't know when he wants to do it after our updates, maybe. But yeah, let's. Why don't we do updates again, uh, as we usually do? Who wants to start?
I guess I can try. I
All
can try
right.
to share. Let's see if I can share my screen today.
All right.
Oh
There
yeah.
we go.
Uh, we talked about this a little bit at the GSOC meeting, but this is my GSOC project right now, using some equations for cooperation. Here, sorry, let me share the full screen if I can. Yeah. I'm using equations for cooperation from a book called Simulating Organizations in a paper by Glantz and Huberman, that just basically maps out, given an uncertainty in a system, the rate at which the agents will reevaluate what they're performing, and on the interior, kind of, let's see if I can find it. Yeah, like the benefit rate and the personal cost, and some other variables. Based on those, you can basically see how the cooperation will evolve over time, given a few variables. So I was able to make it into a simulation. It's got some weird noise. Hold on, let me try to go. There we go. And I put some noise in there to make them wiggle in a way that I like. So I'm really excited because they wiggle. And I've been trying to do this all summer. And this is basically my update, which is that they wiggle.
Yeah. No, it looks great. Yeah. So, what are you using for noise? What's the noise?
So this noise is just a normal, it just controls, there's a random normal distribution,
Yeah.
that just goes from 1 to whatever this is. So this is kind of the maximum noise that you could add in the system.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Looks like they're about ready to fission. Like, yeah, they shake and then they break apart into two agents.
And it's funny, I added the noise because otherwise, when you first set them up without any noise,
Yeah.
they kind of settle.
Yeah. Yeah. The convergence of the thing. And so, what
Yeah.
happens when you have noise? It just kind of.
Yeah, when you have noise, yeah, it's more satisfying. But it's interesting. I've done a few different models now using different equations and different, active inference and more automata-based theory. And then this is kind of more of like a systems dynamics thing. And they all have the same behavior, which is that they just kind of go bloop, and settle.
Huh.
So anyway, I'm deep in the literature about how to kind of make these models a little more descriptive or more interesting to kind of avoid these like uninformative stases, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, this is great. Yeah, I like this idea of noise. And, I don't know if you've probably not seen Ankett's work on
No, I'm able to
switching.
see it. I've been reading the switching paper, but other than that,
Yeah, so he does something kind of similar with like using an algorithmic switching technique where he switches out of like one regime and goes to another regime, and it does a similar thing with respect to convergence. It kind of pushes the algorithm out from like being prematurely converged, so it can explore. It basically is kicking it out of local minima,
Right.
and so that's, I don't know. It's just kind of interesting how that's sort of similar, and
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I imagine your agents are being kicked around out of their local minima in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the function that I'm using to kind of drive this whole thing basically has two values. Yeah, let me find the part of the code. Yeah, has two values. The F critical value, which is basically saying what's the amount of which I perceive other people to be cooperating that will make me cooperate. So
Yeah.
each agent has a horizon where they look around them and see, okay, how many people do I think are cooperating right now? And then it has kind of a more complex value derived from its cost and benefit and the amount in the future it's looking and how much it'll reevaluate. And then based on those values, it decides whether to cooperate or not. Yeah, so yeah, I think that the noise, I put it in, let's see, where did the noise go? That's noise, why can't I read anything right now? Yeah, I think I just stuck the noise in the way that the position of each agent changes is what the noise is controlling. So it's just kind of moving them around. But now that you're talking about Ankit's work, and I'm thinking about this a bit more, I'm gonna try it in a different place now. But anyway, this is my update. So thank you all for bearing with me.
Oh no, this is great. Yeah, and this is exactly the kind of stuff that we like to see in the meetings too. Little demos, yeah, it's great. It's great.
And yeah, other than that, I'm just still working on putting together a blog post and a flash talk on intuitionism and neurophenomenology.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
a lot of fun.
And I imagine you want to submit that to Neuromatch. Okay.
Yeah, that's the idea. So I was wondering actually, and I imagine we'll talk about this during the meeting, but whether we're all going to submit our abstracts kind of as a lab, or whether we should do it individually.
Well, the way it usually works is you fill out like a registration form, and they have you can submit an abstract, but you can only submit one per individual. So I was kind of hoping we could coordinate our submissions, and then say like who's doing what. And then the reason I like to know is because I like to advertise them as a group. Like last year we had about 5 or 6 where people from the lab, did different talks, and I kind of put them out as like a group of talks. Come see these talks at Neuromatch, and they get distributed across different sessions, but it's nice to advertise them together. So yeah, if you did like that talk for Neuromatch, first of all, you might solicit contributors if people want to contribute to it. And we have like the Neuromatch channel, so if you want to post take like a Google Doc, with the abstract, and it needs to be like maybe 200 to 300 words, not that long, but you need to have an abstract, and then you can do the talk, and then see if people want to collaborate on it, and then if not, you just submit it by the deadline, and then you'll have you'll probably get in. It's like pretty almost certain to get in, and then you'll have to put the slides together, which you've probably already been doing, so that's fine. But so just let's all kind of collaborate on that, make sure that we're if someone wants to do some idea that someone else isn't doing the same thing, or if they want to be on a part of it, they can be a part of it, and so forth. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Brian. All right. Did you want to go next? Did you say something, Jesse?
Nope.
Okay. Did you want to go next, Amanda?
Sure. So I have been slowly chipping away at this blog post on the concept of grasping, in like physical grasping plus as an analogy for understanding. So I kind of have a good outline. So starting with the question of why we think of understanding as better than knowledge. That's a big topic in philosophy. But before you get into like the philosophical weeds, like initial answers to that question seem to use metaphor, specifically like embodied metaphor, like allows you to see how things hang together, or the use of the word grasp, to have like a real grip on an idea instead of just to have a piece of knowledge. So, and also initial answers allow us to, they talk about what understanding allows us to do, as opposed to mere knowledge, which kind of sounds like affordance talk. So I want to use that as a jumping off point to talk about understanding as like a kind of psychological affordance that goes beyond just knowledge. And then investigate, just like take our use of the metaphor seriously, and try to think about what grasping means in the realm of physical affordances, and what specific analogies could be drawn to illuminate the concept of understanding. And one thing I'm interested in particular is like the phenomenological aspect. So one paper that was shared, I mentioned it last time, the objective phenomenology, I think was the title. That paper uses the term grasp to, it's like a really important part of the paper, for the author's thesis, but the word isn't really, it's like used in place of understanding, but I think a lot more could be said there. So I think I want to, after I, explain my thoughts, I want to try to use that to maybe like strengthen the thesis of that paper, or just like use that paper as a reference point to how a better articulation of the concept can be helpful, or maybe can like illuminate problems. So that's my rough outline of that. Hopefully next week I could do a flash talk, maybe the week after.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't have much of an update. I read a couple papers on plant cognition that were very interesting.
Oh,
I
yeah.
shared them to a couple of the Slack channels. One of them was predictive processing, plant predictive processing, PPP. And I thought that was interesting. I guess I went into it thinking that like, I see how the free energy principle can be used to explain plant cognition much more easily than I can see how it can be used to explain human cognition. So I was sympathetic going in. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Well, that's great. Yeah.
Cognition Features reading group.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thank you for that update. And that, yeah, I agree. The plant cognition is really interesting. I saw those papers in the Slack. I haven't read through them much, but yeah, it's definitely, I don't know, probably have to bring that front and center in the meetings at some point. Like what is, things about predictive processing and how they're useful. And this blog post sounds pretty interesting. You're working on a number of concepts. So this is really, I think, fits in well with a lot of the things we've been talking about in the reading group, but also some of the things we're talking about in other areas of the lab. So that's good. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Do you have any interest in presenting that at NeuroMatch, Amanda? Or no? You don't have to, but
I'll see where I am closer to the deadline.
Yeah.
Okay.
But maybe.
Yeah, just because when I thought flash talk, I'm like, you probably mean Liz, like everything in NeuroMatch will be a very short flash talk and not a lot of deep stuff. So I know that's probably not what you meant, but also like you could totally just, whatever you're thinking of probably would be sufficient for.
Okay, I'll try to get it into an abstract form. So it's the deadline for abstracts is September 5th?
Yes.
Okay.
Just abstract only. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Who wants to go next?
I'll go last because I
Okay.
have stuff.
So Morgan.
Well, not much this week, but obviously, sorry, those are two rabbits that are making noise in the corner. But the big news, certainly on the organoid front or stem cell front, is the artificial embryology paper from Cambridge. two papers. So one from Wiseman and one from Cambridge. And they're covering both, technology. I mean, both are demonstrations of this embryo development. But one is got some additional technology that is useful. That as we know that the kind of the bioreactor technology is essential. And that's the Hannah Lab paper from Wiseman. And the Cambridge paper, and I can't remember her last name, but the lab paper is not only a demonstration of growing an embryo and seeing organs develop, heart and lungs, heart and brain, but is also a demonstration of a knockout, and that the brain development shows, in a kind of demonstration of this gives you the same brain defect with the knockout of PAX6, and it's very interesting again because it's also what Madeline Lancaster, in terms of just a stem cell cerebral organoid, I think it's the same particular feature that she said was her most kind of reliable organoid in terms of the particular brain feature. So there's a lot to catch up on there, and that it does have some nice. I can maybe try and line it up in terms of it's got some nice graphical abstracts that are nice to look at, and we can cover it in a bit more detail.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, there's always so much to catch up on those kind of papers because they have so much supplemental information, and
and as we've said before, it's really a convergence of multiple technologies and multiple fields to produce this one output. But some really interesting developments, because this is a much clearer path to growing organs than we've seen before. Because this is an embryo, not a cell that's growing tissue and without vasculature, right? Yeah. So this is much more likely to produce a viable organ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, that's your update.
Well, I would, there's the please check any of the there was some videos of previous conferences that are great. Things I've dropped in the Slack, and of course right now is computational cognitive neuroscience is taking place, which unfortunately I've been in. It's been south, and yesterday was my daughter's birthday, so we went to go see the Rogue One remastered in IMAX. It was cool. We got a Andor poster.
Yeah.
for going, and they did a super long intro for that. So that was cool. So I don't know whether there's a chance of me catching that any more of that today, but I do know lots of people are there, and so hoping to hear about it. And
yeah, it's good. Is it a virtual, or is it in person, or?
It's in person. There's I'm catching on academic Twitter.
Okay.
The people walking around and stuff, or Russ Poldrack was suggesting walks for people, and I know they did their kind of their neuromatch in the sense of pairing people last, I think it was Thursday night.
Okay, yeah.
And again, I was more catching it off of academic Twitter than.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, it looked really cool. I kind of wanted to try to go to, but it didn't work out, especially because I'm not going to Seattle. But I'm like, I was even trying, like, I was even, like, I think Megan Peters is there again. And I was going to try to look at some of the stuff about, like, virtual reality or, like, basically disability related stuff there. And I talked to her and she's like, well, there's nothing here directly, but we could try to put together a discussion if you make it. Because I was like, hey, could I, like, justify this through getting funding through some other things that I have? And it didn't quite happen, but I haven't had any time to look at it yet, but if anybody is looking, please post. It doesn't really matter anywhere. Please post anything that's cool there, because I wanted to go.
So it's down. I mean, it's down at the waterfront, and which helps justify it, as if I'd probably be bringing kids, and yeah, see what I can get in and maybe take pictures of. But yeah, I'll hopefully report next week of what people have.
I had a couple, like, I was just looking at it too. They're like discussion sessions, right? What were they called? They called were they the ones that do like GADs or like generative adversarial discussions or something? Is that what they do, or is that another conference? I don't forget it.
No, it was like GADS or something. Yeah, adversarial. Yeah. I mean, I suddenly thought of gadflies, but.
Anyways,
I do hope that they did it fully hybrid, and I hope that people continue to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, generative adversarial collaborations.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Just to kind of I talk about Judy Fan a lot, but they all look pretty cool. Planning, simulating the external world, and primate visual linguistic condition stuff. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Is that? Should I go now?
Yeah, you can go ahead and give your update.
Okay. My update. In the context of, I wrote a little note mostly for myself about all the stuff to cover today, because I know on whoops, I just turned this off again. In Slack or whatnot, there's the Robot posters. I think it might be good for us to talk a little bit later about, like, it sounds like everybody wants to continue into the fall. I know Brian does, and Brian set up the whole thing with Albany, but I think Himanshu and Hussein also do.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. I don't know if we should try to, like, talk more how to, like, feature or center that in what we're doing. But that's a cool thing. And also, I think is it today? I don't think Ankit's here. But I think it's today or this weekend that their conference is.
No, it's on the 3rd of September. I can talk about that more later. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Great. But I know that's been going well for okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put a lot of stuff into Notion, and I'm pretty happy with it. Disclaimer is that Notion is not a web page. It's just like a bunch of notebooks. So it won't have the same functionality of a web page, but it's pretty cool for being a database, a set of databases that are related, basically. It's relational. But I can do a demo on that, and it could take a very long time. So I want to make sure that that's
Yeah, I mean, how long do you?
on the right.
You don't have to go into exhaustive detail, but yeah.
I'll do a brief tour today.
Okay.
But also, like, if people want to take, like, if you don't, nobody has to do this, but if people want to take notes on today's meeting, you could start doing that right now in the Notion space and make a few like comments in the space too. Anybody, I don't know if everybody has full access yet, but just yeah. I might need your email to give you guest access, Morgan. But here's today's. Here's sort of our page stub, and I'll kind of launch into that in a moment. But as far as like other stuff, like for broad updates, all the reading group stuff, I put in. I really tried to prepare for the next 4 months. I'm kind of setting this timeline of like, okay, between now and the end of the year, what's up? Like it can be, fall semester, but for me, it's like there's grad school stuff that I have to do. There's or apply to. There's a few courses I might want to take specifically, and there's all these projects. There's sort of the I'll just start using Notion because it's here. Like, am I? Yeah. If you could give me your email, I can just send it to you. To this whole thing. Time being. Yeah. So like there's the reading group stuff. There is the excuse me. Whoops. There we go. There's been now you should be invited to at least the main oral thing. I've been going through the Johann stuff, and I think I'm just gonna I'll do it like this. One of the things that I like currently about Notion is like I'm keeping a bit of a general record of all the meetings that we're doing in general. So and I'm trying to differentiate them in different ways. The people, are kind of a general attendee list. There's not anything specific right now. But like the third chapter with Johann this week was interesting. I think it was really cool because a computer scientist, Andrew Polanski, was there. Like he was the most familiar with a lot of the topology related stuff and some other things. And it ended up being a 3-hour conversation with a lot of good stuff. And there's a lot of different things to go into about this that I could spend like 30 minutes on this alone. And I'm not gonna go do that. But some interesting stuff kind of was where does computation is there a reason in computation, and can that reason be like parsed out and identified? And there was a lot of really interesting stuff in terms of critiquing Turing machines, a lot of referencing the Chinese room, and kind of how we conceptualize. There might be a lot of like discussion about different orders of cybernetics also, and like one of the not concluding, but like things that Johan wanted us to kind of think about at the end of it was sort of, like in this table, there's nothing's particularly defined right now, but sort of like when we approach the situation and put in a sign or some kind of an operation here, then that will give this, the meaning will change depending on our approach to it and what we want from the table. And there was a lot of like internal versus external meaning and internal versus external semantics. Does the universe compute was kind of a sidetrack thing, and Johan's like, no, it doesn't. But talked about the views that have it, like Max Tegmark, some other people were very into that view. Mars levels of computation, Mars 3 levels, and how does that fit with what we're talking about? And I don't have a good image for it, but maybe computation without representation. There was a very interesting discussion about the constraints that hopefully using topology as a way to sort of address some of the constraints environmentally, and some of them having either meaning or interpretability within the system itself, and how the agent is approaching the external world, as opposed to having the meaning or the interpretable lenses be totally external to the system. I can't articulate that very well right now because this is not on the top of my mind at all. But it was a great meeting. But again, mostly kind of just to mention that very lightly, and then say, oh yeah, we also had our Cognition Futures Reading Group meeting. I didn't put a lot here, but I kind of put some of our notes from this, and like people can come in here and write stuff, and when I do a full demo of this, I'll do more details, but just taking some of the quotes from the book and things that we said. I know Amanda, I think, wrote something here or something else like that. But just some notes from that meeting. We didn't finish, we just finished chapter 1. And then I started taking some notes on, I ripped the whole chapter 1 out and put it into Markdown. So this is like, we have a copy of that, essentially in Markdown with some highlights and notes here that I've put it on the side. It's kind of like a Google Doc. So that's that meeting. A little bit of the Google Summer of Code meeting. Everybody seems to want to continue in the fall, which is really cool. I really wanted to ask more about the freeloader stuff that Brian mentioned too. We don't have to get into that now, but I put that down there as something on my mind. And then today. So this is currently where we are in this meeting, but there. In terms of stuff that I've been working on and doing, I'll show the task board, which is ultra simple, but it is related to other things here. I'll go here actually. So I'm still inviting people to Notion. We have the house draft. We'll probably talk about that later. This is mostly in the works. The UAlbany intern stuff. That was something I did this week. I finished up the administrative work and reaching out to Kirst and submitting the form and reviewing it with Bradley and all this other stuff. I still have to finish updating one of the, like our website component, like the splash page or the landing page for them. Because it's there from last year, but it needs to be polished a bit and updated. Yeah, we have these things on hold. It should kind of be down here. Turn off this sort. Yeah, okay. The We Robot stuff I may get into. I may wait a little bit on that. I've been putting some work in on the methodology project here in Notion, but just in general about like how are we talking about this and framing this. Very briefly, here's kind of our little bit of an overview right now. You know, I might spend more time on this later on, but talking about the vision, talking about some of our driving questions. We have the reading groups link. I'm starting to build up an annotated bibliography section here, and I'll explain. People don't have to worry about the Notion details for it, but just to kind of show, like, you know, here's sort of what we're looking at with that. And the database for the methods itself. Like I even wanted to say, like, when we get into that, if we have time for that today, you know, how do we want to talk about these things? And what I would like to go over the, like, how do we, when we're documenting a methodology, what do we want to have? What's our template for filling out, you know, the information about the method? That's something that I think is kind of the next step for us to talk about and start putting them in our, you know, collection of methods our database of methods. One thing that came up in this whole stuff was looking at Santa Fe's. They have a theory of embodied intelligence, and I'm going to kind of do it this way. But the cool thing about Notion is I made a specific stub for embodied intelligence, which could be huge, and I don't want to put too much into it, but I'm just going to go here and I you know, have a very general description myself, and then some external definitions I looked at. I just happened to find, like, Santa Fe has its own project about it, a theory of embodied intelligence, and they're kind of doing some things that, you know, we're interested in. And I want to reach out to one of the people working on it to say, like, is this an active project? What's going on with this? Because I couldn't quite tell just from looking at this. It wasn't really the most clear if this is totally active or not, but it looks cool. So I want to reach out to them about that. But we, you know, thinking about the talks we want to do, thinking about Google Summer of Code future, and then another backlog thing is just, you know, how are we going to be talking about the Dev AI stuff? Because I'm making a little progress here with the methods project, but I think Dev AI is going to take a little bit more specific work, but that's just back there. So, yeah, I'm a bit meta in this presentation of, oh, Notion, what the hell is going on here? And then talking about my actual updates. So, if there's anything else I didn't say, it's just a lot of different planning that isn't necessarily captured here, and trying to organize some stuff and being inspired by Johan and other people to have, you know, I want to have nicer outputs and nicer presentations in the future. So, and there are a few other things I think I talked to Bradley about, but I don't remember. But that's my breezy update. As far as what to talk about in the rest of the meeting, or if there's any questions, you can ask them. But this is a bit of a fire hose version of, hey, look at Notion, but I'm going to go through it a little bit, maybe like 10 or 15 minutes. I don't know how much time we want to spend on all that stuff today. I don't know what else we want to talk about today, so I can squeeze things around it.
Well, I'll go over some things first, and then we can come back to this after I do that, and then we can do, because I want to do some things at the end with, like, papers, but that won't, maybe that'll be like about 30 minutes, but other than that we have time. So, you know, maybe 20 minutes on, I know maybe you want to talk about the We Robot posters too, I don't know.
If there's time, I may keep them out of this meeting. We'll see.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's when are those actually due to the conference, or when do you have to have them?
I think like about 2 weeks. There's 2 more weekends that I have for them, and I'm gonna try to print them out maybe next week or so. So the end of maybe like 10 days.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that'd be good. So yeah, thank you for the update, and then we'll come back to the Notion stuff in a little bit. Um, we have some things in the chat. Okay, so that's all the stuff about access to the workspace. Okay, so thank you for the updates. It was great. A lot of interesting things going on, and as Jesse said, it sounds like there is a lot of interest in people continuing on from how they came into the lab. So some of you came in sort of with our first cohort of interns. I think Brian was an intern, and is Amanda technically an intern, or is she just kind of joined in with the group?
I'll let that be from Amanda to decide, because I'm like, hey, like you've done like all this sort of other stuff.
Yeah, I know. It's
like,
yeah, I just reached out because I met Jesse through another reading group in my grad program, and I was just like, oh, this is neat.
Yeah.
But I'm just here for fun.
Okay, yeah. And then we had, so Amanda's joining us from just because she's interested in it. And then then we had our GSOC people, which also included Brian and also Himanshu and Hussein. So that's, it's nice to have these different pipelines of people coming in and from different places. And everyone wants to continue on. So I'm glad that, first of all, that Brian and Amanda have taken ownership of some things. That's kind of the key to success in this kind of environment is, you come in and you say, well, what's going on? You have to get familiar with sort of the culture of a organization. Then you have to kind of, in some places they just kind of tell you what to do. Sometimes they kind of let you just like flounder and find your way. Here it's like kind of, we kind of give you a lot of things and say, find something you're interested in taking ownership in. And then, that's the way to go. Because then you have a stake in things. So I'm very much a believer that if you can take a stake in things, that it'll help you kind of develop what you need out of this experience. I don't want to force you to, do anything that you're not interested in necessarily. There are things that you have to do that maybe you're not interested in to accomplish, as a means to an end, but it's not something that, we want to force you into doing in any certain way. So, in Amanda's case, she's interested in philosophy, but also cognitive science, and then exploring that space. So that's pretty open, but it's up to her kind of how some of these things look. She's got the expertise in philosophy, and she's gaining expertise in cog sci, and some of the other tools that you might need to really kind of do a cog sci type research agenda or push that forward. And so, and same thing with Brian. He's a computer science background and other types of things that he's interested in, but building those skills and kind of bringing them into the whole, building a really kind of a unified set of approaches and getting a project off the ground. That's kind of really what it's all about. So in this fall, people who joined early this year, maybe at the beginning of the year, now can start to do more advanced things and kind of drive that forward. So we'll be doing things this fall. We'll be trying to build upon that success. And then of course the open house that Jesse mentioned, we're still thinking about that. So again, I want you to keep thinking about that, and that's a nice way to kind of drive that forward, because you can present the things that you want to do and put them out in public and say, this is what we need for this. Maybe we need collaborators. Maybe we need to have like an event, like, a meeting that I'll run, or, I run the meetings usually now, but I can pass that information, pass that knowledge on to people on how to do that. Because it's not like just straightforward. There's a lot of cultivation there and technical stuff. And so it's like best practices type stuff. So that's good. And then now we're going to be getting more people joining. We're doing this recruitment for the next round of interns. We're doing, maybe some bringing people in from, we're interested in things. So this is again, this is this cycle repeating, and hopefully we'll get more people in this fall. That you know, so we'll see where we are with that. We're gonna try to continue the GSOC. Like we had the GSOC project as a specific thing, so we were talking about open source and was sort of we called it open source ethics or open source data, and we're kind of continuing that theme in the fall because Himanshu and Brian both want to work on it. Hussein is kind of going in the direction of like personality theory and like social dynamics, systems dynamics. So that's maybe that fits in too. So I guess maybe this is not so much open source anymore. It's kind of like a little bit broader. But again, that kind of defines projects. You know, you kind of say this is where I want to go, and then you go in that direction. Sometimes the agenda shifts with that. Like you just call it something else, or it kind of becomes something else. I think I posted something, and not everyone will see it because they're not in that channel. But I posted something from, let's see, it's in the admin lab.
The lab?
So, yeah, this one. Am I sharing my screen? Yeah. So this is from Lana, who I follow on Twitter. Yeah. So this is the Ikegami lab history. She's in the Ikegami lab. I think it's in Japan. I don't remember what university in Japan. But this is like their plan from like 1995. And I like this diagram because it's a nice diagram of like a lab. And like when you start a lab, you start with a certain set of ideas that you want to do. And then you get people coming in. So these are, I guess, graduate students, alumni, or, you know, different researchers who've come in. And they've kind of, because, you know, they take a project and they develop it, the lab starts to get into new things or shift to different things. So you can see that computational science started in the 90s, and then it sort of ended in the mid 2000s, and then evolution of language, dynamical systems kind of went for a while. Evolutional game theory, I think it's evolutionary game theory also. Autopoiesis, embodied cognition. So, you know, you can see like it's kind of moving towards all these new topics. Massive data flow, deep learning, blockchain, sound art. That's kind of like now that's what's going on. So you can see that, you know, groups evolve, research groups evolve like this, where they start with something that's maybe a hot topic in the 90s. And then it moves forward and you maybe lose people or you gain people. And so that shifts with the expertise. I thought that was a really interesting graph. And it really describes, I think, what we're trying to do or what happens in this kind of. Yeah.
I think it's also like very. I kind of wish someone showed me that or described me that when I started research, like even graduate. But then I'm very like mappy, perspective, big picture, whatever person. But in the sense of, I think it's so hard to understand like. A lab in that context is such an evolution. Like it's constantly phenotypically evolving. Like it's constantly not the same. There's the people on the project and the inertia and the funding and the inspiration and the deadlines are so, you know, even it's different. It would be great if someone. I wish, and maybe this is kind of something I want to do in like kind of the mentoring stuff that's still on my agenda. Maybe a little bit later on this year, I'll focus on more again. But like, how do you, as an early career researcher, know about that, and also like differentiating that from like industry-based research, which is much more streamlined and the same but different in a lot of ways, you know, and like just knowing that. So yeah, that's a cool. I think it's a cool chart, and also like be able to say like, hey, like our version, like I kind of know what our version of that is for the last 3 years, but the lab's been here a lot longer than 3 years, you know. So I don't even know all the details. Like I know about like the first Google Summer of Code and MetaBrain stuff, and the CSV conference, and a lot of our epistemological directory stuff. and those are like different arrows in my mind.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of things before that too.
Well, yeah, before you came along, there was this, like, what I called orthogonal lab was very siloed in the sense that I did a lot of mentoring and other types of projects. And actually, I worked with Lana in the eLife ambassadors program, kind of help working with her on some open source software ideas that she had, and so that it's like I did stuff like that with different people and collaborations, but they weren't like this where kind of is more open. I decided to open it up a bit more at some point, just kind of like you know. So yeah, I mean, it was that's how this group has evolved, and then we were always looking at different projects. We've kind of put the open source stuff to the side, but still kind of we're working on it. But it's not like the main part of the lab anymore,
Well, yeah, and just like I said this before, and I know everybody in this meeting right now sees it, but just for those if you're checking the lab, like massive appreciation and credit to like Riley for setting up a situation where there's so much room to go about stuff. Like even like if people like I think about the society ethics and tech team. Like that's what I specifically mean is Bradley's given time from this meeting and other stuff for people to come in who kind of only are coming to the lab to do that. But we kind of have a seasonal approach, like, okay, like the end of the year, we're going to prepare for this set of conferences that are about this topic. And like letting that have its space and involving people like Aaron and Angela and other folks who don't necessarily always come, but are still here and involved in stuff and like giving them opportunities. Like that's a big thing that not everybody gets to do. So it's like I appreciate that.
Yeah, so that was my spiel about that. But I'm gonna kind of go over some things now, other things. So these are updates from my side about different things going on in the lab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have updates too.
Yeah. So actually, we've got a lot of things going on and a lot of things that are coming out soon in different venues. So the first one is this preprint that just got put out yesterday. So this is, I guess it's been, it's been approved. This is actually something we've done a number of talks on intelligence offloading. There was a conference in 2021. That was the offloading workshop, intelligence offloading workshop. So intelligence offloading, cognitive offloading, it's all about like how we put things in our world in terms of our cognition. So we talk about the brain a lot as like this structure that encodes memory, encodes attention, and takes we talk about like how neural networks can do all these amazing things. But when you have an organism, and not just humans but in other organisms, you have a brain. Sometimes you don't have a brain. We're talking about plant predictive processing earlier, and there's a lot of literature on what they call non-neural cognition. So this is where you have cells that say do things like intentional behaviors, or they compute things that look like decision making. And so those are all sort of this internal modeling of things, taking things in from the environment. But we also do encode things in the environment. So we do things like spatial cognition with landmarks, or we have like pieces of paper to write notes on, and those notes then serve as a marker in the environment that allow us to interpret them later. So our libraries are basically storing information for people to get. Like instead of encoding in people's minds, we encode it in books, and then we can go to the book well after the person who generated that knowledge has died and take some of that knowledge for ourselves. And so this is what we call offloading. There's been a lot of work on it in actually Andy Clark, who is cognitive science philosopher. He talks a lot about this in some of his books, where he talks about the blue-nosed dolphin and how they use toroids of water bubbles that form toroids and they use those to aid in their swimming capacity. And so that brings us to this preprint, which is intelligence offloading in the neurosimulation of developmental agents. So in 2022, this was also presented at Embodied Intelligence at that conference. And it involves Angela and it involves Jesse. So, those two people have been involved in this as well. And so then we got an invitation after Embodied Intelligence to contribute a book chapter. And they have this ebook where, they put different topics together for people to read later on. And so this is about intelligence offloading in developmental agents. It's about 17 pages. This is on the Sci Archive now. So this is a preprint server for sort of psychological papers, cognitive sci papers. And it's run by the OSF, so Open Source Framework, or Open Science Framework. So, this is an easy place to post preprints if you're doing like cognitive science or psychology. And, this is going to be published in a book chapter, but the preprint is out here. So there are these, basically it's a mathematical model of offloading. The idea is that you have this agent, and the agent is going through development. So the agent is growing a body around its brain, and the brain size and the body size are scaled by these mathematical regularities. And so you can build this innate structure that gives the agent what it needs. It starts to grow. It starts to acquire information. And then the brain is limited to a certain size, and the body is limited to a certain size. And depending on those constraints, then that determines how much offloading there is. And there are all these other factors that may play a role in it as well. So this is kind of like a formula for putting together a model. So there's some like formal mathematics in here, formal sort of defining parameters, and then there's some kind of speculation. So it's just something that I wanted to get out and into a preprint, and maybe this book chapter. We'll have to do some more editing to it before it's published. So I know Jesse kind of missed out on the edits, but that's okay because we'll be coming back to this. But the preprint, this version of the preprint is out now. So yeah, and you can go here. So we've had 6 views and 6 downloads in like 24 hours. So that's modest. It's not like viral, but what is in academics? So that's that. The next thing is that Ankit and I and another, he has a supervisor in India, or a mentor in India who has worked with him on this. The 3 of us have this paper, Flipping the Switch on Local Exploration, Genetic Algorithms with Reversals. And this is out on the archive, which is another preprint server for CS papers and physics papers, and there's some computational biology, a little bit of cognitive science, but mostly like cognitive modeling and neuroscience. But this is neural and evolutionary computing. That's the subject. And so this is the preprint if you want to download it and read it. This is the second version that we just put up, which is very similar to the first version. This is the stuff, if you've seen Ankit's, I think Ankit's talked about this in the meetings. It's this idea of sort of switching using genetic algorithms. So you have this genetic algorithm, it basically reverses its operations for a while, and you can do this to sort of kick yourself out of a local minima so you can find the global minimum. So you have this energy potential landscape, or this minimization landscape, basically gradient descent. There are different names that it goes by, but basically it's a surface where you have local minima and a global minimum. So you want to get to the global minimum, which is minimizing its cost function or its energy or whatever. And the local minima sometimes are tricky because if you get stuck in a local minimum, you can misinterpret it as a global minimum. And of course, it's not optimized fully. So that's a problem in algorithms because you usually use algorithms to find the global minimum. And if you're in a local minima, then the algorithm doesn't necessarily find the correct answer. So if you're using algorithms, especially genetic algorithms, for things like optimizing a power plant or optimizing some design process, it's going to be very hard to find, it may have to be useful. So this is a method that kind of addresses these issues. It has a lot of like technical benchmarks in it, but it's a nice paper, and it got kind of unceremoniously reviewed at Gecko conference, which is the main conference for genetic algorithms. They said, "Oh, this has been done before. This is just a weird paper." And I told Ankit, don't worry about the reviews that much because sometimes, especially with something like Gecko, it's very competitive. So, keep working on it. So he went to this other conference in India. This is a national conference in India, Soft Computing Research Society. And they said, yeah, this is a good paper. So they gave him some, it's less prestigious, but it's also, that's one of the trade-offs in some of these conferences. If you go to like NeurIPS, it's very elite, but oftentimes, they have to reject a lot of work that's probably perfectly okay, but they have to find a reason to get rid of it. So I think this is a better conference from the standpoint of him presenting this work. So there are this is the schedule for this conference. It's on September 5th and 6th. So it's in the early part of next month. And I think he's in the computational intelligence panel here, TS3. So he's down here. Wait a minute, it's not him. I think it is computational intelligence. Is probably a different session though. Here it is. TS8. So this is like 1400 in India, which is like 3 or 4 in the morning in the US. And this is, or 2 to 4 in the morning in the US. And this is the presentation here. And so not only is this going to be presented as a presentation, but also as in a conference proceedings. So this will be published in a conference proceedings as well as the preprint. The next thing we have is this poster, An Introduction to Developmental Embodied Neurosimulation. So this was presented at, this is actually kind of a good overview of developmental AI, but it's sort of our flavor of developmental AI in the group. So this was presented at the main conference as a sort of a flash talk, flash poster.
Could you put that link in the chat, Bradley?
This one?
Yes, for the poster.
Okay, I don't
Thank you.
know what the
I'll put that
sharing
in
permissions
the
are. Yeah, so this is for this one. All right. So yeah, this poster, this was actually originally presented at the main conference. That was in December of last year. And then the INCF Congress is coming up in September. And so then, the question was what to present there. There's an opportunity to do like different booths at INCF conference. And so one of the booths is, we got a booth for this abstract. And so this has been updated from the main conference. So the main conference was like, basically this goes through all the different papers. So I think I showed Jesse and Avery a roadmap of the developmental AI landscape, and it was just like a boxes and arrows model with the different topics that we talk about under that rubric. For this poster, it kind of lays out some of these things, and it's been updated from the one that was presented at Maine. So the way this goes, if you go through this poster, these are all the people who've kind of contributed to this initiative. So there are a lot of people here, and you can, if you go through this stuff and you say, I really want to work on this one aspect of it, that's great. We're open to new people on this. But so the way this goes, and it's been updated to reflect some of the newer publications on these things. So the first thing is Gibsonian information, which we published a proceeding in the studies in computational intelligence on. And this kind of goes through its line of, I've made a video of this for the main conference. I may make another video for this conference. I'm not sure yet, but it's just updated slightly. So the Gibsonian information stuff is the same. This continual embodied learning and developmental agents is also very similar, where you have this agent it's developing. So I talked about in the offloading stuff that there are these developmental agents that develop. And so you can see here along in the middle, you have these developmental Bradenberg vehicles. You have Bradenberg vehicles that lay sort of an egg. The egg has like these 3 germ layers that emerge. The 3 germ layers then get specified as different parts of the vehicle: sensors, effectors, the internal model, the brain, and then the outer shell. And then it gets differentiated, and eventually you get this vehicle. And that's sort of the idea behind a developmental phenotype. And then developing the network inside, which are just nodes between the sensor and effector. And then you can have like a model of cells that are born and die off at different points in development. And that changes the topology in development so that you get these, it basically encodes or can do different things in the life of the agent during the developmental period. And we have a paper on this. We also have this artificial life paper, which I've talked about a couple meetings ago. And then we have this MetaBrains work, which is, of course, these layered models that you stack on top, and they get stacked in order of their degree of representation. So you have things of low representational, value down at the bottom, things of high representational value at the top. So symbolic models being towards the top, connectionist models maybe towards the bottom, and so forth. And you can do this in different ways. A genetic algorithm can be even less representational than a neural network. That's what this is kind of showing. Although it doesn't have to be, just the way you configure the models in the way that they connect. And so then, this is kind of going over some of these things that have been put out on that topic. And then this embodied hypergraphs, which is something that's debuted at Network Neuroscience. That's at the NetSci conference this summer, about like how these networks inside of these agents can be represented. So these are basically, directed networks, complex networks, but they also have a body around them. So they have a starting point and ending point. There's information coming in, information going out, and there's a structure within this. So it kind of explores this structure and how this can grow and change. I don't have the offloading stuff on this poster, but that's something that, for a future version of it, we put on offloading. We can put on there are a couple other topics that may be taken off this template poster. So this is the template for this, and we just have these different things that are, we can do with it. So we have all these different topics that we put papers out on, preprints, journal articles, things like that, and then we just plug those into this paradigm. Finally, I want to go over this Like Minds community, which I know.
Which event was that at, Bradley? Was that the INCF thing or the other one?
Yeah, so this is at INCF. This is going to be presented at INCF. And then there was a previous version, which is, I don't have the link for in there, that was at Maine conference, which was in December. That's the Montreal Artificial Intelligence group there. Montreal, they have, a lot of different groups there working on AI stuff. So they have this conference, and that was where that was presented. And, we can present it in a number of different places. We just need to think about So this final one is the Like Minds community, which is actually a nice YouTube channel. It's based out of India, but they talk about a lot of open source community topics. So, we've been doing this all summer. We've been talking about open source communities and some of the measures and some of the problems and some, things that we can model. And they really kind of have a nice collection of videos here on different things, like community-based learning. Some of these things are Facebook ads, but like how to make a community podcast. How do you do community building? How do you deal with inactive members? There are different things like that, and it's not like, I don't know how exhaustive it is, but it's kind of interesting. We can put together like a list of these kind of resources where people are kind of going out there, because there's really not a lot of formal literature on it. We've talked about some conference papers and things on open source communities and open source maintenance and things like that, but there's always stuff on. I think YouTube is actually more fruitful in that way, because it's kind of like people giving their thoughts on the practice. So those were my updates on that stuff. I wanted to go through those things. I know we probably had some comments on those, so now's the time.
Oh, it's great to see the introduction to developmental embodied neurosimulation poster. I think that'll be good for Dev AI stuff. I put a stub in our. I don't know if it's really best to call it a stub. I put an entry in the database for our outputs, and I put that in there. And I'm not trying to like redo like overly categorize the stuff in Notion. More being able to reference that specific thing, I think will be helpful. Like now I can just reference something when I'm building out the Dev AI stuff, because I think it'll be really. This not today, but I do want to seriously approach the work of building out the Dev AI stuff, and it's good to see that again. And also just the other stuff that a lot of cool stuff is going on, so there's a lot of good updates there. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely the Dev AI is of the most interest. But I had kind of, getting perhaps being on a holiday or other things, was hard to remember all the different threads. And that was nice. The poster reminded me of all these different threads, and in particular, just that I haven't checked in with the continual learning community, continual AI group that's out of they're a great YouTube channel for those interested. I could try and post a link, but but then combining it with embodiment and some of the other topics that you brought up in the poster. So that's yeah. I need to follow up on those threads.
Yeah. I think there's like a lot of the AI conferences that we've been to, they don't. I mean, they talk about embodiment, but it's kind of separate from like the machine learning and deep learning stuff. So it's like, here's some great stuff, technical stuff, and then here's embodiment, and then like there's some robots, and it's not really that well integrated typically in a lot of the sessions.
The other thing that it did bring up, and I'm trying to find the exact reference here, but I think it's like some Schmidt-Huber work from that was like this spring, but it was talking about like updating weights, and that sounds like just deep learning. But let me find the links on that. But it wouldn't surprise me if Schmidt-Huber is doing something that was cool and relevant for developmental AI.
Yeah, I know people have done like a lot of stuff on like developing neural networks. There's been a lot of there was early literature on like developmental connectionism. So I know that there were some papers in the 80s and 90s and maybe 2000s on that, where they were looking at that topic, and then like updating weights and things like that, and
it would be like that, and that would be like his PhD thesis.
Yeah. But like in the embodied sense, that doesn't really give you much, because it's just the network, and the network maybe isn't even embedded in anything. It's just kind of like I'm putting data in, and I can change the network weights in a certain systematic way, and it just kind of shows. A lot of it has to do again with this serial acquisition of things, and then if you can acquire things in a certain order that like composes something, and so that's like development for a lot of people. Like that's I think in the field, that's kind of the way people think about it. Like it's like you're getting things in sequence, and you can think about when you have what we talked about, I think last week or the week before, that paper on like developmental learning. How if you take data from like babies, it's very different from like the way we learn like as adults, or how we train machines to think, because it's like you fixate on objects, you figure out what the object's doing, and then you can generalize to other things. And then, but there's stages where you go through that. So it's like you might get fixated on a cup, and then you go through a stage where you generalize the cup to other things, and then you get to the stage where you can refine those categories. And that's like all, it can't happen all at once. It has to happen sort of in stages, and you have to have those things in place to go forward. So that's kind of the idea.
And I mean, I don't know whether in topics like curriculum learning or doing curriculum learning, whether you get kind of nonlinear behavioral growth, because that would be a kind of that would be more matching what developmental psychologists see with babies and toddlers, young adults. The curriculum learning seems to be more trying to solve the like you're saying, like an optimization problem, and in a somewhat like don't get stuck in local minima cases. You've got to find this particular trajectory to get to this lower minima, and that's why you stage like increasing the complexity of the environment.
Yeah. Yep.
One of the things that came up from all of that was talking about Ankit's paper and stuff. Is this a slight professional development or like career researcher comment? The more I've gone through all that stuff and being rejected many times, as I'm sure there's that thing in I'm gonna go biblical for a minute, where it's like the part in the Bible where it's like, oh, like anybody who hasn't sinned, you can throw the first stone. But it's like the academic version, anybody who hasn't been rejected, you can go. So it's like, and they all walked away. Oh, this first, it's like you've been rejected so many times. So I feel like there's a certain confidence and humility that I'm learning about submitting to things and like presenting stuff to, knowing that it might not actually be the best or final version. Right. And understanding that sometimes even lofting something into a conference where you're pretty sure it's not going to be accepted still has value. And as long as you make it time efficient for yourself and you take something away from it, hopefully the comments aren't just like, I saw one on Twitter today, like, oh, it looks like a child wrote this. And they were saying like, this doesn't help anybody. You're just dumping on somebody at that point. Yeah. So hopefully you get useful reviews to some extent. But at the same time, like, if there's a good way to go about it, and then hopefully you get good pushback. But it's like it's almost like there's just been an internal transformation over time where it's like it's much less personal. Yeah. I think it's a learning. It's almost like not at all a personal reflection. Getting accepted to a lot of things, or the feedback is like so. Yeah. More about that some of the time, but that definitely stood out to me. Is like, oh yeah, like I think it's important. I think it's important to say that. Yeah. People don't say that as much as they should sometimes. Yeah. Anyway.
I think usually, if you get like reviews, and it's important to know kind of what's like really kind of wrong with the paper or what can be improved upon versus like things that are kind of, gatekeeping or personal attacks or whatever. It's like there's a lot of both. Sometimes you can get like the sort of the stuff that's kind of, people want to do that because they want to find a reason to reject it versus something that's really fundamentally needs to be improved on in the paper. So, there's also the skill of finding that stuff and like knowing that that's really the thing that's going to be, needs to be addressed. And so, Ankit, after his reviews, he presented a plan for improving it. I said, yeah, that's great. So, he did some of that and he got into this conference And so now, he'll also have improvements for the work going forward. He wants to do other things with it. So, I think there's a lot of technical work that needs to be fleshed out more. But then, having a good handle on what that is, when you have some work that maybe you get it published and it's like in a, maybe like a conference proceeding, and then say, well, I want to write a journal article on this. So I want to move this work forward, but then how do I do that? What's best? What's the best way to do that? How do I improve the work? How do I streamline it? Those are all things you need to ask, but submitting it to these venues will give you that answer. Sometimes people will point those things out. So it's very important to submit, and if you get rejected, especially by a high-end conference or something, or a high-end journal, that can be valuable just to know like what's going on. Yeah, Morgan.
Oh, group
I-
watching?
Yeah, so I didn't want to. I put it in the chat because I didn't want to break the flow here. It was more a reminder for myself, like don't forget to bring this up. But if people aren't already familiar with Brain Inspired podcast and community, it's another active Discord community. As well as a podcast you can catch is interviews with usually two, sometimes one, sometimes two neuroscientists, AI researchers, cognitive scientists, etc. But this coming week they are doing a special. So become a member. Support him on Patreon if you can, and that you get a link to the movie. And I'm blanking on the movie, but it's about the Henry Markham's basically the European Human Brain Project first decade, and I'm if somebody
Blue Brain.
can remember the
Blue Brain.
I forget what they. Sorry, I mean the title of the documentary.
Oh, okay.
So let me. I'll try and look, but I'll post it in the chat. But anyway, it's watch the movie to get watch the movie. You get a link to it. I'm not sure if the movie hasn't been released yet, but. It's apparently it's with a lot of really interesting access. It's certainly an interesting project. European Union put like €1 billion, I think, or something like that, over a decade into this project, and a lot of people felt that it did not overpromised and underdelivered. Is I think the tagline of the movie, but. Certainly, talked about the resources that have come out of that. It's been rebranded as eBrains now, but when hanging out with the Ross and Pix4 people a couple of weeks ago, nobody was really familiar with neurorobotics.net, which is still was a platform that really developed out of the European Human Brain Project, and. So watch the movie and then join. I think his episodes this next week will be, people talking about the movie and discussing that as a community. So sounded really interesting, and again, like there's so much in the eBrains platform that is really important for both independent researchers as well as open science in general.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And if we're also bringing up movies, the Stuart Brand documentary will also be released next week for those who aren't familiar with, because I think Amanda brought up our a whole Earth catalog.
Okay.
I forget how that popped up, but anyway, Stuart Brand's documentary coming out next week. Which again, I'm blanking on the title, but it's like something as gods. But
Yeah, we are gods. There was a book under the same title that came out a couple years ago. It's pretty good.
Did you want to say something, Amanda? Okay. All right. So I guess Jesse, if you want to do you wanted to do this longer thing on Notion, if you'd like to do that now.
Yeah. 30 minutes or so left. Let's do a first pass through Notion just to kind of. I think what I'm going to do, I'll show things quickly. I'll answer any questions or try to show some of the operations. People don't. I'd be happy to walk anybody through Notion who wants to get involved with it, but like, I think I'm going to make another like tutorial video like I did before, just to kind of show it. I really like it, but I don't want it to scare people or think like, oh, I don't want people to feel any pressure, like, oh, I have to put this here or look. You know, when there's a grading metric exposed, it's like, oh, I have to conform to it and act in a certain way. And it's like, this is not evaluatory. It's just trying to organize some of our stuff. And I'm gung-ho about it. It's actually useful for me for some of the things particularly now that I'm trying to plan out bigger developmental projects. It's like, okay, like that's part of my renewed appeal to it, but also I'm actually doing the same thing, a very similar set of things with another group that I'm with. But let us begin our tour. There will be two main, if you see this screen, I'm showing a different screen than what I'm looking at. Is this like,
it's all Notion.
Is it differently shaped?
Oh, yeah, it is differently shaped. Yeah.
I don't know if it's like, I'm going to share my other thing. I have a different setup from normal, as we can tell, but thankfully Justy is being kind to me today, so. Okay. All right, so I will start here. I really like having multiple tabs of Notion open at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it helps quite a bit, especially when I'm adding new entries and then linking them. Like, I'll show kind of what I did. Now, on the left side, y'all probably won't. The trickiest thing is like I have to invite everybody to each of these main stubs. So basically, these three are the ones that are currently active and shared right now. I've changed a lot of things around. These are still things, but they're not fully there. So if anyone doesn't have access to these, let me know. But the biggest thing I'll talk about today is mostly the library, what I'm calling this library section, because this is basically a set of databases. And from these databases that are also a bit interrelated and relationally related and overlapping, it makes some of our other efforts nicer. Like right now, this is just to say this is the old basically front page for the whole project and the whole group or whatever it was. This isn't fully up to date. You can see stuff from the CogSci stuff from last year, state-of-the-art AI, RIP, a startup that did not fully make it, a generic looking set of projects, and some of our history there. But the most useful stuff for Coaching Futures for right now is going to be the reading group. And I have all of our reading group notes and also Johan's notes from the Logiciel sessions. They're here. I have a list of meetings. As a note, this table is it going to show if I do this? No. Well, if you see I clicked on it, it went to library under meeting notes. So this is actually a linked instantiation of, this is not, it's displaying a view of the table specifically, basically. That's not located here. but in the reading groups, I have some are the materials we've covered. These are all like very general. Actually, yeah, each one of these is a link to something in the reference material section. But in this particular view of the reading groups, I have some of the actual materials. I have the playlist. I have one of our collection of papers to write. And these are actually, let's just say Google Doc. The two of the Google Docs that we have so far. There's this, again, kind of a smattering of notes and notebooks. There's also the Cogside methodology project, which is something I just put together last night, and it's very open to being critiqued. And I don't even think this isn't, the team isn't complete, like, but as far as I put together a very brief overview of what we're looking at. I mentioned currently we have the reading group, we have an annotated bibliography, which right now is, I didn't finish linking that up, but that will basically be a subset of our reference materials view. Like there's going to be a bunch of papers and books and stuff here, which you can kind of see here. And I'm differentiating external references from other people's work from outputs, which is like people that have done in the lab. Like I just put this entry in from the poster that we talked about earlier today in the lab. But there's, I've put like the blog posts and other things in here, just in case we reference them and want to keep track of them or whatever. But going back here, I'm also starting to develop the methods database, which currently only has one generic entry. I don't know how to talk about it. We could spend a lot of time on this now, but I just want to say, like, maybe I'll do this in the reading group and go from there. But starting to think about how are we going to be talking about it? What's our description going to be? These are some potential things to consider. I'm not saying we have to get into all this stuff, but just what came to mind on the first pass was like, okay, technically what is it doing? What are its best use, shortcoming, flaws, context? And also I would like to have something of a historical, political, cultural context, time, motivations, like what are some of the paradigms it's supporting or refuting? What are the fundings that making it more acceptable or not? To be determined. I would like that to kind of be present, but not necessarily the main focus of things. And like how we do this, and like what are the use cases I'm mentioning? I referenced our book that it came from, and I know it's not really called the Praz's interviews. I mean, we get something like guided interviewing through an unbecoming aware session. But what are we going to call that? Like that's just something we can sort that out. That's not something that I want to sort out today, but kind of just saying, getting a whole list of the methods that we're going to be looking at and populating this and refining our template. Like this is a really deep in the weeds thing to do, but if you're going to the concept database, which is kind of like this one is the library is a set of databases about a bunch of different things that I'm kind of trying to group in specific categories, and then we can reference and link them later. Concept is probably the most broad because it's just like AI ethics, Dunbar number, active inference, computational phenomenology, Husserlian phenomenology. I'm not sure. Those might be a little bit extra. I might consolidate those, but these are just things that are coming up as we're going through text that maybe we should know or talk about or say, oh yeah, I saw, this is a way out there example, but like, oh yeah, the Chinese room, I think I was reading a book where that was mentioned. It's mentioned all the time, but we could have that linked to the Kaplan book or the Fuchs book, or both of them. I think it was in Fuchs book. But stuff like that. Whoops, I just made something I didn't want to make. Okay. Anyway, if you just go to the library's main page, I put meeting notes at the top for now, but these are all categories of different stuff, and you'll get a feel for it over time. And I won't spend too long on it, but meeting notes currently is all of the meetings since like the end of July that maybe not all of them, but we have kind of a reference to a reading group with Varela's with the Unbecoming Aware, Ecology of the Brain, Alicea sessions, and some of these don't have much in them. Like I don't think this has much in it, but that's fine. It's kind of just a very brief smattering of notes about it. What do we discuss? It doesn't have to be there. It doesn't have to be, there's not necessarily a need to take extensive notes here for me or anything. However, like, Morgan today, in the one that was for today's meeting, Morgan put some notes here, and that's pretty cool. Like, he wrote out some of those things, and I like that might be a nice thing to do. Or like, if we get to a place where we like Notion, we could all have this open and add comments or links here that will actually be a little bit more durable than like, they'll show up in the Slack or in here's their stuff from today's meeting, but then we don't ever look at it again, kind of a thing. So this might be a little bit interesting way to look back on stuff and find, oh yeah, like three weeks ago, and they mentioned this thing. So it might be we could use it that way if people want to use it. I'm going to try to take notes like that too. I took a little bit of notes like that at the Google Summer Code meeting from this week, and these are all, again, super informal notes, not anything that is going to be like published. And there's a question of like, how public should this be? Like, it's currently accessible, but not, I'm not trying to make, I see this much more as a workspace and instead of notebooks that is essentially open source because the lab is. So this isn't like your most secret deep thoughts about how to, save the world or whatever you want to do. But I think it's a little more structured than some of our other stuff might be. So, but also, like, just as an example, as we were doing this, this didn't exist before. Like, I actually thought, okay, I would like to have a reference point for Human Brain Projects. We mentioned that now and then. And so I went over to, I'll just show this quickly, my other tab, and I put that in there. And so now that I put it in this, under library groups and institutions in this database and made it this thing here, I can now reference it here. And this will take me back to that page that I just made. And it does track all the backlinks, which is pretty cool. Like, you can see, oh, this is linked in the library meeting notes, NeuroSim to date. So that's a very easy feature for that. And I think as we're building out a lot of these categories or doing some of the work for DevAI, the Methods Project, and some other things, I think this will be a useful thing over time. Let's see. People. I'm literally putting everybody in here. One thing that's important to notice is that I'm putting even my own, like myself and us, in the people section, as opposed to this stuff up here. I feel like these are users, and like, if you're gonna tag somebody, like, for some reason you want to come in here and tag me, like, let's say you want to say, hi, Jesse. Notice that there's, this is my old account, so disregard that one. This currently is me as a quote unquote people, or I would say more of a user. This is like someone in the actual people database. So I'm gonna try to figure out how to differentiate that for people, but like or for users, in that if you want to tag a user of the Notion database, tag them in a different way. Whereas this will take you to that person's stub. This will take you to one here under library people and that person. You can see a bunch of stuff. I've happened to have links in these different categories, but it's what it is. It's not that important. You don't have to document everything you do, unless you want to. Then also have events, which I kind of keep track of things that upcoming, and also things we mentioned, things we participated at. These aren't totally fleshed out and incomplete lists, but when I have time, I'll do that, or someone else wants to add stuff, they can. Currently, I'm differentiating between events, people. These, as it stands, the oral events are stuff that we've actually done stuff at, like presented, had some kind of a activity at. Whereas all events, if people want to document events or just mention, oh, there's a really cool event, whatever, you can do that. But I'm going to kind of separate that out from things that we have done, as I would keep track of a lot of events. And I don't know if we even do you remember, Bradley, if we participated at the SIPS one?
We didn't participate. No.
Okay, then I'm going to say not attended, and it should. Oops.
Yeah.
It should eventually magically disappear from that.
Okay.
But I don't think I have the filter.
So this is.
But yeah, you get the picture. Whoops, I did it wrong. Oh, okay. Well, I'm kind of doing a whole lot of stuff right now. There we go. Anyway, you were saying, Bradley? I know
Morgan posts a lot of events, like things that are on YouTube, things to attend. That might be a good thing to put in here, like, have like a database of the YouTube, at least if it's like on YouTube, or if it's something that's been recorded or something, to have that in there so we can like go back to it and say, oh yeah, these are all.
Sometimes past, and I just want to remember them for next year.
Yeah. Well, that's something too.
If there's something particularly like, relevant or whatever, you can throw it in here, and put the name and the date if you want. You don't have to, fill out everything. But that's a nice way. Like I would totally put computational cognitive science, the one we mentioned earlier today. And there's probably some cool stuff from there. And you just put like a link and a reference point. That's fine too. And it's pretty easy. The nice thing about Notion is like, I kind of screwed up showing you here, but like, you can kind of see there's no more. The SIPS one is gone because I put the checkbox here and I put not attended. So if it's someone that we didn't do, it will show up here as opposed to the other one. So that's kind of basic database stuff, but it's a nice way to do it. Reference materials is basically books and papers that other people wrote outside the lab. Concept database is kind of the big messy one of just concepts that I'm not quite sure what to do with yet. Task board, this can be a table, a board, which I'm kind of using a Kanban board style, and also what's kind of cool, timeline view. Like this is something that when we have specific stuff, like the We Robot stuff I'm saying is kind of due essentially by in the first week of September or so. The abstract is due the 5th. So this is kind of a way to visualize timeline with tasks. These are all interrelated as opposed to being like separate tasks on GitHub or whatever. It's not a bad way to visualize stuff. So if we have specific deadlines, we can put it in this view. Groups and institutions are what I'm doing for like a specific way to categorize some stuff. Like Johan's Cognitive and Neural Studies group, our general group, this group. It's mostly as a way to differentiate and categorize how to tag other stuff. So you can add stuff here, you don't have to, but that's it. I'll leave it at that. Oh my God, I took a little longer than I wanted to. I'm sorry, but this is kind of the overview. I'm gonna make a little more of a simpler how to use it, but basically, fundamental rules are: if you want to add stuff, consider going to the library, putting something in an appropriate spot, and if you don't know what to do or where to put it, just make something and write a comment in it, and you know, ideally you can go here if you want to see templates or whatever, or just check this out, new thing, and say, if you have questions, just do this with a typo included and I'll be fine. So there you go. But put something in Notion if you want. And Notion's super easy to rearrange, so you can even just make a stub anywhere and tag me, or just say, hey, I made this, and we can put it where it should be. Don't worry about organizing it too much, but if you find it all useful, please, use it and do what you want to do with it. The end. Boom.
I have a question. Can we, this looks like it's very good ultimately for versions of documentation. You get to a certain point, you just say this is version 1, and then version 2 will be later, but we want to add to it. Is there a way to publish this and put it out as an open source document? Can I publish it as a markdown file or some sort of set of database tables or whatever?
By publish, what do you mean?
Well, I mean push it to a public version, but have that public version frozen. So we don't have to have every update public, but we can have one version out there and then update it every 2 months or something.
So that's a good question, in the sense that everything you see us as shared over here. Am I sharing my screen?
Yes.
Because it doesn't show me the little button, but if you can see this, yeah. Everything in the shared section is, well, that's not necessarily true, is it? This is okay. This is shared with you all, but this is not shared publicly to the web right now. So that's a nice feature that we have. If we wanted to make something, you can publish something in Notion, and I think Bradley knows this, but just to kind of say this, you can make this. If I turn this on and get the web link, anybody can look at it. I mean, even here it kind of gives you a web link. And you could post specific updates to the Notion page itself, and it will be featured. However, you also can export, and I forget the right way to do that, but you can is it here? Yeah, you can export pages into PDF, HTML, Markdown too.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's if you wanted to put it on another website or something else, you could basically convert it. It's not the most clean, but I've done yeah, sure. I've done that too. I've basically made something in here and then ripped out its HTML, which is not the cleanest code, but it comes out, and you can slap it on a page and post it that way too if you want to do it that way. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but there's a lot of different ways you can get via Notion something published that's updated in a more discrete, version controlled manner, or you can get the code or exported in some format that's useful to you as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. So thank you. It's just...
and again, currently these things, I don't even think this one is totally public. Every time you change, if there's anything that I would ask people, I wonder if I can lock this.
Oh, there you go.
I only want to lock it in the sense of please don't move this stuff around. Don't drag and drop on the column over here if you're using it, because that will reset permissions, and I'd have to reshare stuff and whatever. So if you want to make a page, you can. If you want to make a sub page to this, you can go here and hit plus if you want to do that. But try not to drag and drop around because then I have to reset some of everybody else's access.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll leave it at that. This is taking up a long time. So.
All right. I don't know if anyone has any other comments about that, but we have some things in the chat. So there were some things about the Brain Inspired podcast. Amanda said, "We Are as Gods" is the name of the documentary. I believe that's for the Stuart Brand. And then let's see, braininspired.co is for something else that it's a podcast thing that you'll find interesting, neuroscience, AI, that sort of thing. So we might as well get good at it as the rest of the quote, I think. That's Amanda. It's from this We Are as Gods conversation. In Silico is the name of the HBP documentary, so that's the other documentary. State-of-the-art AI is awesome. That was the thing that Jesse was working with. That was the startup he was mentioning, yeah.
It was
a great project. I mean, couldn't that become a community project? Or, I thought it was a community project.
I don't know the late. Well, it was a serious attempt to be. It was a community project, and then it was we're going to get acquired, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to do this, and it. I don't really know. There was talk last I heard about selling off some of the assets, and I don't really know what it is, but it was a valiant effort at the time, and maybe it'll be repurposed in something else. I don't honestly know. I was at one time asked if I wanted to do a lot more with it, because things were changing, and I'll say that much. But yeah, it was a very good team to work with. I'm happy for the experience. But yeah.
I'll ask you offline more questions about it.
And then the final two comments these were on the Notion work that Jesse's done, and I think it's very good work. Thank you. Amanda said this looks great, and Morgan thinks it's really cool, some of the things you can do in it.
I'd be very happy. I know Amanda's been doing like annotated bibliography stuff, so I would be happy to get feedback from you about what you've been looking at, papers you want to do, or how can we make Notion like fit what you want it to be. So please, everything here is not me dictating how to go. As always, it's more I'm putting this out here to have something to show you, to talk about it. That's been like a difficult thing for me to realize. Like, you have to put something out there that's not great to get feedback, to collaboratively do it, and then redo it. So this is all just a first go at that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the questions that you wrote down in the methodology section look great. Like the things to have in mind when we look at these papers, and then the database of methodologies. I think that's a really good idea.
That way it's a toy example right now basically, but like we can just keep building that out, and that's going to be the basis for the project, and then we can have different layers or interviews or whatever we want to do that on top of it. So okay, that's it. I'm going to let Bradley wrap it up.
All right, very good. Thank you, Jesse.
Next Wednesday, I might take some time specifically to go over some of the posters, and maybe even beforehand, I might just say, hey, I might just send a link or put maybe in the notes or something, but like say, could you look at this and like give me your impression, and then it will be related to other stuff to do. Yeah. So more about the posters and some Notion stuff and reading group stuff, potentially between now and Wednesday, but that's it. Done. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So I wanted to wrap up with some papers, some things that we have in the reading queue here. So let's see. All right. So, okay. All right. So why don't we go into this folder here? It's called Evolutionary Connectionism. And so these are some papers I found on this idea of evolutionary connectionism. We know what connectionism is. We know what evolution is, and now we want to like see what people are talking about when they talk about evolutionary connectionism. So these are the series of papers by a couple of people here. Michael Levin is on this paper with Richard Watson and Christopher Buckley. These are computer scientists and people in biology, so they're interested in philosophy as well. This is a hypothesis and theory paper in Frontiers in Ecology and Evolution. This paper is titled "Design for an Individual: Connectionist Approaches to the Evolutionary Transitions in Individuality." So I think this idea of individuality, or what they call biological individuality, came up in one of our Cognition Futures meetings, kind of independently of like a discussion on it. It was just kind of like we talked about individuality and I brought it up. So this is kind of going in that direction. The idea is, thinking about organisms, or, we usually think about organisms as a population when we talk about evolution. We talk about, gene frequencies and like what populations are doing and how populations evolve over time. But they're also individuals, and we talk about, individual variation. But there's also individuality in terms of like, there are things that are unique in populations and different individuals. There's also, behavior that's unique, both in evolution, but also in like collective behavior. So, this paper, I don't know if it has an abstract. Oh, this is the abstract. Okay. So I'm going to go through the abstract. The truly surprising thing about evolution is not how it makes individuals better adapted to their environment, okay, which is the idea of like a population approach. Individuals are going to be adapted to their environment. They produce offspring. Those offspring get selected differentially, or there's genetic drift so that those individuals end up in different populations, or, there are a number of mechanisms that you have. But the thing about evolution that's surprising is how it makes individuals, period, which means that like it makes variation. And that's another theme of evolution, is variation. So when you produce offspring, you get recombination, you get mutation, and those individuals carry differences in those genotypes forward and phenotypes forward in different ways. So there's the rules of heredity, but there's also individualistic characteristics. And then when you add behavior on top of that, individualism becomes even more sort of an interesting thing to think about. So all individuals are made of parts that used to be individuals themselves. So this is interesting because now they're talking about individuality, biological individuality, not necessarily just at the scale of an organism, but at the scale of identity, things that have a unique identity. So all individual organisms are made of parts that used to be individuals themselves. So what that means is that multicellular organisms are, in the current theory, is of endosymbiosis, where you had eukaryotic cells that their origin was from a bunch of organelles and a bunch of other things that were individual organisms, and that they came into this symbiotic set of relationships, and then they became like individual cells, and those things all just became part of a system. So, for example, mitochondria were at one time like a separate species, and then they became incorporated into the cell, and they sort of became integrated into that system. In such evolutionary transitions in individuality, the organized structure of relationships between component parts causes them to work together, creating a new organismic entity and a new evolutionary unit on which selection can act. So this is, again, this idea of you have a bunch of things that come into association, and if those things are different individuals in a species, those are no longer the object or the sort of the thing that's being selected. It's now this collective that's being selected. I think people have talked about this in terms of collective behavior too. If you have a bunch of individual birds, say, in a flock, is it that the birds are the object of selection or the flock? And there's this whole debate about group selection. But, thinking about this not just as group selection, but as like that flock being like a new functional unit that's very much like something that selection can act upon. So there are tie-ins to group selection, but it's not quite the same thing. Just keep that in mind. However, the principles of these transitions are made poorly understood. In particular, the process of transition must be explained by bottom-up selection, or on the existing lower-level evolutionary units, without presupposing the higher level evolutionary unit we are trying to explain. So this is about like these different levels of organization. You go from these, maybe organisms that become part of a unit, so they become organelles, and then they have this, that's like a lower level of selection, and then the organism would be the higher level of selection. Just thinking about that in terms of going from like genes to tissues to organisms to collectives, that's what they mean by top down, bottom up. You either start at the top or you start at the bottom and you work your way in a different direction. And this is what they mean by selection. It works on, there's a level of selection, and then it affects other levels in various ways. In this hypothesis and theory manuscript, we address the conditions for evolutionary transitions in individuality by exploiting adaptive principles already known in learning systems. So now they introduce connectionism. So connectionist learning models, well studied in neural networks, demonstrate how networks organized functional relationships between components sufficient to exhibit information integration and collective action can be produced via fully distributed and unsupervised learning principles. So we're kind of getting into this collective behavior thing a little bit more directly, but we're thinking about it in terms of connectionist learning models. So this is kind of interesting. So these fully distributed and unsupervised learning principles, examples are without centralized control or an external teacher. So again, this is like a connectionist model. It's just connected nodes that are, non-specific. They have weights. There isn't necessarily an order to it. There isn't like necessarily even an external supervisor. It's just that they can learn. We know that from, neural network theory. And so what is that? That's our unit here. Evolutionary connectionism translates these distributed learning principles into the domain of natural selection and suggests how relationships among evolutionary units can become adaptively organized by selection from below without presupposing genetic relatedness or selection on collectives. We address how connectionist models with a particular interaction structure might explain transitions in individuality. So this is like where these things come into association, they form this connectionist model. Then if they have the right sort of interaction structure or weights, they can become part of a whole, and no longer, this individuality moves up to another level. So you have these individual parts that have individuality, and then if they become associated in the right way, you can have that whole network become the unit of individuality. So it's kind of just thinking about it at different scales of organization. So we explore the relationship necessary for evolutionary individuality, where the evolution of the whole is a non-decomposable function of the evolution of parts. We've talked about irreducibility in the cognition futures group. We use that. They're using that term, and this is maybe a different way of thinking about it, but maybe a little bit more accurate. Is that there's this non-decomposable aspect of the evolution of parts. So when you get these things in association, they come together, you can't now decompose them and say now, like if I have a mitochondria in a eukaryotic cell, I can't just take it out and say, okay, mitochondria, go do your thing. Because as it turns out, it's been fully integrated into the system. There are genomic changes that, the genome of a mitochondria has been optimized for energy production in a eukaryotic cell. So you can't take that organelle out and make it survive on its own. It's part of that individual, or that individual unit of the eukaryotic cell. So it's interesting, this non-decomposability is maybe a better term, but I don't know. I mean, this is just a technical term as well. Organismic individuality, where the development and behavior of the whole is a non-decomposable function of the behavior of the component part. Non-linearly separable functions, familiar in connectionist models, where the output of the network is a non-decomposable function of the inputs. So these are all sort of these rules for, how this non-decomposability works in this kind of system. Specifically, we hypothesize that the conditions necessary to evolve a new level of individuality are described by the conditions necessary to learn non-decomposable functions of this type, or deep model induction, familiar in connectionist models of cognition and learning. So they go through this theory. It's very much rooted in, like, they talk about social evolution theory and kin selection, which is part of this group selection debate, and part of what, you talk about things like inclusive fitness, and you talk about some of these other things that are involved in this. Um, and so I'm just looking. Oh, they also talk about ecological scaffolding and social niche construction. That's something from the extended synthesis that involves, individuals building their own niches, or individuals in a species building their own niche, like a beaver building a dam, and they sort of affect the environment and maybe even the environmental fitness that way. Multi-level selection, again, it's another part of sort of that group selection debate. You have selection at multiple levels versus people who say that selection is primarily on the genome. So there are different ways that people view that. So there are these classic debates. Then there are these fitness interactions, and they start moving into collectives. I don't think they have any nice. Oh, here's a nice diagram. It's a sort of a diagram of showing linear separability, or nonlinear separability. So basically, the idea is you have these two things, pluses and minuses, and they're in this bivariate space. So you can draw a line. This is linear separability, where you draw a line and you can say that those that's the dividing line. And then you have nonlinear separability, which kind of tries to segment out these different events. So if you think about a scatter plot, you think about classifying it into two groups. You can draw these lines around the things that are one group or another, and that's sort of the boundary. It's a very classic machine learning thing where you draw a boundary around those things. You try to find like a group or a cluster of those things. It's tricky because you can draw a line around any set of objects using like a big enough, high enough order polynomial, but the idea is it has to have some sort of like support in reality for that. So when you draw these boundaries, that's a little bit tricky. But this transfers over to some of these boundaries of like, what is in a group, when what can't you take apart? You can't take apart this group. You can't draw lines around these different individuals. They're all part of a single unit. So it's kind of an abstract idea, but so they get into this sort of thing with collective behavior and individuality. Then they get into like these non-linearly separable functions and connectionist models, where you have these weights and the weight structure we talked about with respect to some of the developmental neural networks, and then this is what that looks like in the separable space. So it's interesting work. They're working on this with neural networks with connectionist models. So it's a little bit, it's kind of interesting because it gets to cognition and learning. So it's not just about like this evolutionary question. It kind of gets into cognition and systems that have intentional behaviors and things like that. So yeah, this is a nice paper. It goes on, and now we're getting into evolutionary connectionism here. So that's a good point to get to this paper, which is from Evolutionary Biology in 2016. This is a paper, Richard Watson's also on this, kind of talking about the algorithmic principles underlying the evolution of biological organization. And they talk about these acronyms EVO, DEVO, and EVO, ECO. And so EVO, DEVO is the evolution of development. EVO, ECO is the evolution of ecology and evolutionary transitions. So they get into this space where they're talking about development, evolution, ecology, and then these transitions. And so then they kind of go through this idea of evolutionary connectionism in more depth. They get into some of these things about so the problem here is that variation, selection, and heredity are modified by organizations that are themselves evolved. So this is this idea, and it's come up again and again, about organisms or individuals that do something and they change the conditions under which they're operating. So you think about natural selection. You have an organism and it's in its environment and it's doing something that affects its own fitness. You can't just simply say that the fitness function is just something I can impose on it, and that's true over a number of generations. What tends to happen is that those organisms create sort of their own fitness by interacting with their environment, by having offspring, and then that fitness function is updated, actually ideally after every interaction, but definitely after every generation. And so there's a sort of a feedback loop there that we still don't really understand. A lot of people want to say that there's feedback to the genome, but that's probably not the case. It's probably more about like feedback to that fitness space. And so, there are ways that people have thought about this, and it's wonderfully recursive because we can see this in behavior as well. When you do something in behavior, you affect other people around you. You affect your future behaviors. So this is another model for cognition as well, where you can look at this sort of consistent modification. And this is not like there's this idea of Lamarckism, which is where organisms can will like giraffes can will themselves longer necks by eating leaves off the trees, and that's of course was found to be not the case. There's a Darwinian case to be made that there's selection for longer neck giraffes, and that this happens over a number of generations. So you don't want to fall prey to that sort of idea, but there are definitely other ways that you can conceptualize this sort of continual feedback on things like selection and fitness. So there are they cite a lot of things here from the sort of the extended evolutionary synthesis literature, going through a lot of this. So it's actually not really about connectionism directly. There's a lot of evolutionary theory that goes into this, and then they go into this idea of biological networks, and then connectionism and cognitive science. They review that, and then they get down to evolutionary connectionism. We introduced the term evolutionary connectionism to recognize that by processes that are functionally equivalent to connectionist models of memory and learning. So that's how we usually use them. Natural selection acting on the relationships within and between evolutionary entities can result in organizations that produce complex system-level behaviors in evolutionary systems and improve the adaptive capabilities of natural selection over time. The basis of evolutionary connectionism is that simple principle of positive feedback on the organization of a system. Well understood in the context of neural network models, it is also common to the evolution of developmental, ecological, and reproductive organizations. So this is their idea, and this is very much in sort of this idea of the sort of the Santa Fe view. Farmer in 1990, it's Dwayne Farmer, talked about some of this, and this is like this complexity theory idea. It's sort of bringing that into evolutionary theory. So this is very deep, gets very deep into a lot of theory. If you're interested, you can read these papers. But I don't want to, I can't get any more deeper into that right now because we don't have a lot of time left. But basically it's learning how to adapt, teaching the system how to adapt. They have things like self-modeling systems. This is the term that they use. And this is what I was describing before, where the context of the organism continually changes and adapts, and it's self-modeling. That's the idea here. And so this fits into a lot of the things I think we've talked about with respect to some of the books that we've read in the Cognition Futures group. Some of the ideas, there's a very different take on it, but I think it's probably useful in that way. So it's solving problems of adaptation, and so they make that connection to evolution. Finally, there's this paper, Neural Complexity and Structural Connectivity in Physical Review E, which is from 2009, and this is a little bit different take on it. This goes back to Tononi, who has done some things on like integrated information theory and things like that. So Tononi, 94, proposed a measure of neural complexity based on mutual information between complementary subsystems of a given neural network, which has attracted much interest in the neuroscience community and beyond. We develop an approximation of the measure for a popular Gaussian model, which, applied to a continuous time process, elucidates the relationship between the complexity of a neural system and its structural connectivity. Moreover, the approximation is accurate for weakly coupled systems and computationally cheap, scaling polynomially with system size in contrast to the full complexity measure. We discuss connectivity normalization and resolve some issues stemming from an ambiguity of the original Gaussian model. So the reason I've put this in there is because it kind of tells you a little bit about like networks and some of this neural complexity and structural connectivity. It's kind of a little bit off of the topic of evolutionary connectionism, but it does deal with these networks as well and how you can measure information in them and scale them up. So this is a little bit different here. They're talking about approximating neural complexity and get into some of the modeling, Gaussian models for doing this and so forth. So, all right. So I think that's enough for that. I wanted to maybe leave a couple minutes for discussion. If people had questions about that or if it sparked any interest in other areas. You're muted, Morgan.
Sorry, I've got some people rising now.
Yeah.
I need to take care of breakfast, but Richard Watson's work, has spurred a lot of ideas, and I'm trying to think of the population genetics work that he cites a lot. It's a Hungarian name based in Munich. I don't know if
Smadmary?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. But yeah, you can, as you said, Watson's work really pushes the idea of evolution as learning, and therefore you can find these great parallels across multiple domains. But yeah. It's great to see these papers again.
Yeah.
He was my wife's advisor in Southampton.
Okay. Yeah. It's like, I mean, actually, there's an artificial life community. There's a lot of work. I think he's part of the work on like a lot of the stuff people are doing with, like they do a lot of stuff with different types of learning, like Baldwinian evolution, which is learning. It's like almost like cultural evolution, but there are different ways that people have explored that. And that connection between like, having an intentionality on the one hand, but also this idea of evolution as a random driver on the other. So thank you, Amanda.
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
And the Wagner book that, or the Wagner references that you had there, he's got, if I remember right, he's got some nice books, covering multiple domains in biology where these are, the adaptation can be reframed in this evo-devo framework.
Yeah.
And again, it's like evo-devo, go.
Yeah.
And somebody's put it all together, it's like evo-devo, eco.
Yeah, they do that. Yeah. Yeah, and then Wagner talks about evolvability, which is like the ability to evolve different solutions. Like, so you're bending in your starting point. How can you evolve? Is it likely that you'll evolve to point Y from X? And so that's another thing. It's kind of interesting, especially with respect to like behavior and other things like that.
And I did drop in the Schmidt-Huber link, or at least the one I was thinking of. I mean, I absolutely think you're right. Like, it's not embodied.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, maybe more how it's perhaps relevant to this kind of evo-devo.
Yeah. Jesse, you were going to say something.
Oh, not a whole lot. I've got to go myself.
All right.
I got most of the paper discussion, but some of those papers look very, very good. So I look forward to reading them. That's it for me.
All right.
I'm gonna go watch my football team. Hopefully, not lose a game.
All right. All right. Well, thanks for attending.
The good game's going on.
Yeah. Talk to you next week.